welcome to Building a PMO Culture webinar. My name is Colin Baker and I'm going to be the host of the background. After the webinar's finished, later on what we'll do is we'll provide the links for the webinar, which will be recorded, and that will be loaded up onto our APM YouTube account, and likewise for the slides loaded onto our SlideShare account. Both of these will then be listed onto the PMO SIG community page of the APM website. So realistically, you'll still both be able to get access to them anyway. Right, much further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Emma-Ruth Arnaz-Pemberton, who is a real PMO guru, so she tells me, and she's chair of the APM PMO Specific Interest Group. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Colin. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Really, first things first, some of you will have been expecting two of us from the PMO SIG to be here. Unfortunately, Andrew Honey has been called away on an urgent work matter, so you're stuck with me, I'm afraid. As Colin said, I'm the chair of the PMO SIG for the APM, and I'm a project program portfolio specialist. I have lots of experience in the change industry, but I do have a particular focus on collaboration and people. And at PMO SIG, we believe that a lot of that comes from having the right kind of culture in an organisation. Some of you may have attended our conference over in October, and the night before we actually did a roundtable with some of our speakers and guests, and actually to tackle this topic in order to get ready for this webinar. So this isn't just our opinion in the SIG, this is really made up of information, experiences and opinions from people all over the industry and at all levels of working with PMO. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit about PMO SIG. So we try to facilitate collaborative learning so that we can engage with membership and help you grow your PMO skills and competencies, really. We do like to reach out to other disciplines. We are very conscious that PMO potentially touches everything. So we do, any event that we do, we try to reach out to other SIGs so that we can get a more kind of specific view from their perspective of whatever topics we're trying to cover. We like to be an open source of unbiased advice. So we get quite a lot of emails just asking for, this is happening in my PMO, what's out there that might be able to help me? And it really is unbiased. We all wear separate hats. So as all of you, we all have day jobs. So yeah, we wear very much a PMO SIG hat where we're able to offer advice and help to people. We also have a bias towards action, understanding the latest thinking and quickly getting it into a way that you can easily digest. So we're very passionate about PMO. There's 9 people in the specific interest group. We're all practitioners as well, so lots of years of experience. So hopefully this will resound with you today. We're going to talk about what is culture, first of all. There are many things out there and lots of videos, and if you put culture into Google, lots and lots of things come up. So we're going to really explore that a little bit. We're also going to talk about some obstacles to putting in a culture of change, some strategies that have worked for some of the people that were at that roundtable, and we'll give you some PMO wisdom. The PMO wisdom is a series of quotes. We try and interview people and really just ask them, if you could go back in time and give yourself some PMO wisdom, what would it be? So we've had some interesting ones, as you can imagine, but we will give you some specifically related to culture today, so that you go away with some genuine quotes and ideas that people have worked with in the past. As Colin said, I will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to write them in, and hopefully I'll be able to answer them all in the time that we have. So I won't bore you any longer. We take part in the State Project Management Survey each year, and for 2016 and 17, the respondents, we hope, told us the things that are difficult to embed from a PMO perspective. Building a culture of change that spreads widely across your organisation is one of them. It comes up year on year. We'll be very interested to see what happens this year and see if that's moved, if people are working in this way a little bit more, or if it's still something that's very difficult to do. One of the reasons for that, we think, is it's hard to get the support to allow PMO to step out of its comfort zone. In some organisations, it's very much seen as project management and PMO is a bit of an exclusive club, And it shouldn't be. It should be inclusive. We've already said that PMO touches everything. So why doesn't it do that in organisations? And sometimes that's the understanding of what a PMO is and does. But that's one of the key challenges, is to really gain that support to step out of the natural PMO comfort zone. So as I said earlier, this webinar was designed by our committee, some speakers from our PMO Goes Hands On conference, and guests from the conference itself. So actually delegates that happened to be staying overnight, and we thought we would invite them, so we can get to know some other people in the industry, but also to gain and leverage the fact that they were there. It seemed a bit of a waste of knowledge and talent to not kind of use those people to do something like this. So culture is a number of things out in the wider world. It's a set of beliefs that we all believe and sign up to. It's usually a set of values around who we are and how we act. In a workspace, it can be ways of working. And really importantly, it's about community. So really, like I said earlier, values in an organizational context. What is important to the organization? And really, how does that get translated into guidance? Because values, most organizations have values. Quite a few also have principles that lead those values into their way of being. Values could be customer first. We always put the customer at the heart of what we do. But it's how organizations transfer those values and live those values into real guidance. There are some organizations that give new employees a handbook, and they expect you to work in this way. They expect you to show and demonstrate that you are living the values of that organization. And that's really important part of culture and community. Also then, naturally leading into behaviors. So how do you demonstrate the values of your organization? And that's really interesting to think about in the world that we live in today. There's lots going on outside in the politics world and all sorts of places that you think, are those people really living and demonstrating those values through their behaviors? Sometimes a lot of people might say something, but what they actually show is and can be very different. Both of those kind of manifest themselves into habits, and your organization will have its very own habits that are very much based on its culture, the values and behaviors of the organization. It represents the way that things are done. Maybe you have tried to change something and people say, well, why would we want to change it? This is the way we've always done it. We don't know any different. We don't need any different. It can manifest itself into how we react to a crisis, in terms of we've had an issue happen. How do we react to that? Do we, on some level, bury our heads in the sand? Is that just the culture of the organization? Do we carry on regardless? Do we do something about it when there is crisis out there? Your values and behaviors will very much show in the habits of your organization. And lastly, it will show itself in how we plan for the future. Very old-fashioned organizations that are very hierarchical will plan very differently to the dot-com companies that have been around and have grown exponentially for just a couple of years. So the habits of how we plan, do we naturally do a 3-year plan? Is that how we plan? Do we plan from year to year, or even from 6 months to 6 months? I know one organization that has to plan every couple of weeks. So they literally revisit the work it is that they have that they're doing every 2 weeks. So values and behaviors inform our habits, and all of those create a particular culture. And every organization is different. It doesn't matter what kind of industry. You can be in the same industry all your life and go to 3 different companies, and the culture will be different in every one, because the values will be slightly different. They'll be derived from different principles and the leadership and what those people are like to some degree. It will manifest in behaviors. How are you expected to show and demonstrate that you are living the values? And then lastly, that really fizzles down into habits and the way things have always been done syndrome. Why would we change? There's no reason for us to change. And sometimes that's correct. I'm not saying we have to change everything, but you have to consider that sometimes it is about habit rather than what is right for the organization in its current reality, in the reality of today, where the world is getting smaller. people live in a world of instant gratification. We all have our phones. We want to know news immediately. We want to know change immediately. Our stakeholders are changing, so at some point our habits will have to change. And in order to change our habits, we have to change the culture. We're asking people to change potentially 30% of their day-to-day life. And that's quite hard, because if they've been doing the same thing over and over again, as you do in your own personal life, then why do you need to change? If it's not broke, don't fix it. So once we understand what culture is, its values, behaviours and habits, we start talking about obstacles. It's external to the PMO, as some obstacles of putting in a culture of change, a PMO culture into an organisation. Maybe your organisation isn't change ready. Maybe it hasn't decided that it wants to change. And that's really important, because quite a lot of organisations, they do kind of say, oh, we want a PMO, we must have a PMO. But they don't necessarily understand why. And that organisation, really to build a culture of change and a culture that the PMO can really help to facilitate, that organisation has to decide that they want to change. Then, once they've decided that, they need to understand that they can't run before they can walk. If they try and do that, you end up with change fatigue. Too much change, happening too quickly. I'm sure you've all been there. And the thing that suffer are the people. Because even if an organisation decides to change, they'll say, well, we want to change everything. And actually, it's about being realistic with that journey and making sure that we are clear in the amount of change we're going to effectively inflict on people. Because we are change agents, so we do affect change. But at the same time, we are also humans, so we are affected by change. And we need to think about that when we try and put in a new culture or trying to tweak the culture that we already live in. Internal to the PMO, it can be around, we maybe don't take all the time we should to get to know people, to live a day in their shoes, to understand the current culture, especially if you come in as a temporary or an interim or a consultant. It's very easy to just go in and say, well, this is what PMO is. Actually, we need to be sensitive to what does the current culture look like today? And should we be trying to change it, or is it just about enhancing what's already there? The other part of it is it's a push, not pull situation a lot of the time. We need to make sure that people are engaged in the journey. So we don't want to inflict change on people if we can help it. We would rather they were voluntarily on the same journey with the same vision and with those same agreed values and beliefs of what the future might look like. So there are some internal considerations and obstacles sometimes that are, in some cases, to do with people. We have to be sensitive to that. We have to think about the perception internally. What is the perception of PMO? I joined one organisation and did a bit of a survey. It was a very simple thing to do, but it absolutely told me that people didn't know who the PMO were, what they did, and why they were there, or even where they were located in the office. So it's really important that we understand what the perception is so that we can build on that relationship with the business, building a bit of a rapport. The last set of obstacles, I suppose, is around process. PMO can quite often be seen as supporting the delivery rather than supporting the organisation. It can be seen as very much an administrative function in some areas. And that might be correct for that organisation. I'm not saying it isn't. There isn't a particular type of PMO that we should all strive to be. But we need to think about what is the remit today. What actually can we help to facilitate? Because it might be really unrealistic to get involved at the level you need to get involved with the people to instill a new type of culture. The other one is resistance. There are quite often misaligned expectations on the level of maturity, and sometimes even what the path is that people are going to go on from a culture, organisational, PMO, or even individual perspective. It does mean that if I speak to people and do maturity assessments, I'll speak to one person and they tell me they're at a 4, and I'll speak to somebody else and they say they're at a 2. So if we don't build that rapport and build that relationship and ask the question, you will get resistance. You will have mavericks who just want to do it their own way, or rogues, whichever way you want to call it, that just want to get on with doing it how they think it should be done. So the process and the remit of the PMO is really important. Sometimes it isn't appropriate for us to try and change the culture today. What we need to do is maybe start to negotiate so that we can get into that space and actually start to push out a new way of thinking, a new way of working in some areas. So in terms of some strategies that have worked, understanding what makes your customers' lives difficult and working with them to take away their pain. You have to build genuine relationships. It has to be a two-way thing. If you say to somebody, I'm going to take this pain away, I understand now exactly what you're feeling and why you struggle with change. This is what I'm going to do to take it away. But it's a two-way conversation. So I will work with you if you work with me. It's a negotiating position, and we need to be brave enough to work that way. If I build something for someone that's going to ease their day-to-day pain on reporting, I want them to show off that report, and I want some information from them. And that's okay. It's not about just saying yes to everything. It's about making sure that we put ourselves in a negotiating position in a positive way. Your relationships have to be genuine, and I've been in many organizations where people kind of see that as well, it's part of the job, I have to talk to people. But with PMO, we're changing the way that people live their lives. So those relationships, we have to get to know people, maybe walk a day in their shoes before we decide to change the culture, and really understand what it is that they might be feeling. People and how people feel is a huge part of our working environment these days, and we need to make sure that we don't have to be best friends with people all the time. Not everybody's going to like what we do or us as individuals, but absolutely make sure that the relationships we do build are genuine, and that will give you credibility because people will feel like they can come and talk to you, and that's fundamentally what we want. The next strategy that's worked for people is to influence at the right level. Quite often we try and go as high as we can possibly go to influence. But actually somebody at the round table said, no, you should influence the people below the level you actually want. So if you have a particular C-level executive who's particularly resistant, don't try and influence him or her, try and influence the level below. And for them, that worked really well. And it's not perfect. We would love to always go in at the top and have one conversation. But even if you have to start at the bottom, then at least then you can cascade upwards. And never underestimate just human curiosity. We're born with a lot of curiosity. That's why babies put things in their mouths all the time. As adults, we tend to lose that. We have a job, we have a routine, we have a life, and we lose that curiosity, but it's still there. So there's nothing stopping you from making sure that the things you give people look slightly different. So when they are with a C-level exec, they are, what is that? Why does that look different? Why don't I have that? I want that. So it's about influencing at the right level, and the top of the chain isn't always the right level. You need to talk their language. Make sure that you speak and act in ways that support the organizational value and the existing culture. I go into organizations, and the first thing that I end up doing on day one is I change the way that I say certain things, because I hear them speaking that way, and it makes more sense for me to align to their way of working, their way of speaking, their culture. And immediately it gives you, they trust you a little bit more. It shows them that you're willing to adapt to that person or that company's style. The existing culture will have its own way, and if you try to change that way without understanding that way, it's never going to work. So you need to make sure that you talk the language of the organization. Understand what's important to them, what is the value that they care about, and talk in that way, and you will get a much better, different response to if you can just go in with your project speak and your PMO speak and your best practice speak. Not everybody speaks our language any more than all project managers speak finance. Not everybody does. We can't assume that everybody understands project speak. And ask questions. Always start with why. My favorite TED speaker ever is a guy called Simon Sinek. And he says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. That's why some of the companies like Apple are very successful. It's not the what that you're buying, it's the why. Why is it going to make my life better? So it's really important to start with why. You go to an organization, I want to put in a change culture, I want the PMO to facilitate that. Why? What are you trying to achieve? If you don't know that, then you will fall over at some point on the journey because you won't be giving them what they actually need. Somebody I respect very much told me that when you go to a new place, you say, why am I here? Or why do you think I'm here? What do you want me to change? What are you scared of that I will change? And what are your expectations of my role? And actually doing that with a few key stakeholders can be phenomenal because it gives you so much insight. And when you're trying to build a community culture or culture of change, whatever you want to call it, community of practice, you've got the interest, you've got PMO, project management, that's what I'm interested in, the community and the culture being about and learning. You then have to put on joint events. You have to make sure that the practitioners can actually interact with each other. And if you don't understand why, how will they understand why? So ask questions. Don't be scared to ask questions and spend some time doing that. It's a strategy that works really well. If you use these 5 kind of, they're not really steps, but concepts in terms of, I want to build a culture that's going to support my organization when it comes to change, make people's lives easier. That will help you massively in getting buy-in. Build genuine relationships. Make sure that you don't focus just on the C-level. Influence at the right level. Sometimes that's the bottom of the chain, and that's okay. It will take a little bit longer, but that's okay. Understand what's important to that organization. In a finance institution, chances are what they value most is safeguarding people's money. In a food manufacturing company, they will value traceability and quality of product. So you need to think about and understand what is the value of that organization, what do they care about, and then talk in that language. And ask questions. Use that human curiosity that you have within you and ask why, and why, and why, and why, and maybe drive some people crazy. But if you do that, you will absolutely get further into that door that you've maybe been struggling to get into. PMO wisdom. These are some of the elements that, or quotes, if you like, from our guests. So focus first on relationships by building trust and genuine friendship. Really important. It's all about people. How we make people feel today in the workplace is huge, and we need to embrace that and work with it and not be scared to build genuine relationships. One of my big things is to make it subscribable. It's not an exclusive club, but at the same time, you don't want to spam everybody in your organization with information about what the PMO and what projects are doing. One of the things I tried with a global organization was to make it subscribable. And actually what we found was in the beginning it was all the delivery teams. They had their own little community and that's the way it had always been. But soon people from sales started to subscribe because they were going out to customers and their customers were talking to them in project language. So they were like, oh, what is this? I wonder if my organization does this. And before long, we had a global community of practice that focused on project management and how we do projects. We trained not just project people, we invited sales and HR to workshops because the skills are actually quite transferable. It doesn't matter what job you do, you still have to talk to people, you still have to deal with risks, you still have to plan your days. So actually make it subscribable. There will be some people that never subscribe, and that's okay. They'll probably get their information through the rumour mill, and that sometimes that's fine. So it's about acknowledging that, but then embracing the people that are interested. The next piece of wisdom was to know when to back off. Sometimes we just want to keep going and keep going and keep going back to that person and asking why some more or whatever. But actually, you need to use your gut instinct. You have it, trust it, know when, do you know what, I'm not going to get anywhere with this. Maybe I need to influence a different level, and know when to back off. Because other people have other jobs as well. They've got the day job to do. So maybe now's not the right time. I like the next one. No one destroys what one helps to build. If you engage people in that community, if you get them involved in the things that you're doing as a PMO, if you get them to test and help you to design stuff and maybe give them some interim work to do as a PMO for people that are interested, if they help to build it, chances are they will use it and they won't grumble about it, because if they've been involved, it's also theirs. It's a little bit theirs, and people tend to really take ownership of something like that. So really get people engaged. And reaffirm where you are and where you're going to be. However you do that, tell people where you are, be transparent, be honest. You know what? We suck at stage gates. Fine. At least now the organisation knows that there's something that we're working on. That's okay. It's about being brave enough to be honest. We ask our project managers to do it every day. We ask them to put their project red if something goes wrong. And some project managers are still very scared of doing that. But maybe it's because we're not living those values ourselves. We're not showing that that's okay. So be brave and say what you're not good at, as well as what you're good at, especially what you're good at. As PMOs, we don't shout very much about the good things that we do. And to build a culture, people need to know that you live the values, that your behaviours match everything you're trying to get others to do, and that you are adding value to the organisation. And the only way to do that is to communicate to those people that subscribe to the idea, to those people that subscribe to the journey. Make sure that you're telling people what it is you're doing and being transparent about what does and doesn't happen. These were the guys that kind of came to our round table. We had dinner and we talked throughout all the courses about all the things that you've seen today. In terms of culture, I'm going to hand over in a second, but other stuff that's coming up, we're very much promoting the Benefit SIG webinar on the 30th of November. We're looking to work with the Enabling Change SIG for a transformational change. So that's all around, if you're a PMO and you're affecting change, how do you deal with being affected by change? And then next year, we're going to run a lessons learned guidance workshop, and we're going to actually develop a booklet that we can put out there to say this is how we can do that. You can get involved with PMO SIG, contact us in whichever way you want. Email, we have LinkedIn, we're very active on Twitter as well. So do get in touch if you have any questions or you want to get involved, then please do not be afraid to get in touch. We're very friendly. So I'll hand back over to Colin now, and Colin, you can give me any questions. Thank you very much for listening, guys.
Hi, Emma, and thank you. We've got 2 questions at the moment, so I'm sure that we're going to get a few more. How would you sell the benefit of a PMO to a new customer or to an existing one?
2 very different kinds of customers, I guess. I'm assuming we're talking about sort of I'm going out to sell a PMO or the idea of a PMO into clients rather than it being another department, for example, in an existing organisation. It depends. You need to understand the challenges that they face, and you need to ask the question of value and understand the question of value. If they really care about finance, then the PMO that you can potentially kind of develop with them for them is very kind of focused and speaks that language. One of the key things is around understanding the value, defining the right service catalogue. You don't have to be all things to all people, but what you can do is define your services as a PMO, because you are effectively a service provider, to define those services so that they match with the value thread of that organisation. So if they're very interested in finance and control and visibility of where their people are, then you will probably focus more on demand and resource management, financial control. If it's a very people-oriented organisation, it might be around training and development and coaching and mentoring and career paths. If it's all about delivery and they really care about that delivery piece, then maybe it's more about processes and standards. So define your service catalogue to match the business and then say this is what a PMO could do. There's all this other stuff that's lovely, but this is the thing that's going to add the most value quickest way. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, I've got Mohib here says, have you found subtle variances across industries when setting up PMOs?
Yes. Like I said earlier, my biggest I started consulting about 4 years ago. So the beauty of that for me is that I was able to go to lots of different companies in lots of different industries. And even within industry, there are lots of differences because, and it goes back to that what does that organization value? So I worked for a fire authority for a while, and when I sat with them, I went in and they wanted me to implement a PMO and review the processes they had in place. And what transpired was that they weren't that bothered about kind of the planning standards, because a lot of the people that were in the PMO were actually firemen or women who had been brought into PMO. So they'd had other people who had come in and tried to kind of enforce all these planning controls and things like that. But if you think about firemen, they're already really good at planning. They're naturally good planners. So the whole ethos for me was not to try and fundamentally change the nature of those people, but work in the way that they work. So I spent some time in the fire stations to understand how do they respond to crisis, to calls. What happens when the beepers go off and everybody leaves, the whole building practically. In some instances, it happened in a couple of my meetings. So it was really around understanding the intricacy of, they care about putting fire trucks on roads. They don't care about planning. So naturally, they're not necessarily natural project managers, but they are really good at planning because they can deal with the crisis really well. So it was about tweaking the normal standard way of working so that we could, again, just talk their language and not fundamentally try to change them. When I worked in a financial organization, there was so much compliance work that it blew out everything else. So there are always going to be nuances, even from one food company to the next, depending on where their products are coming from, their ingredients, depending on what their processes are to get the stuff out of the door. They will have slight differences, and that's why for me, understanding the organization and what's important to them, it will tell you what your services should be, and that's how you sell in a PMO. You give them what is actually going to add value to an organization. You don't give them a very strict prioritization process if that's not something that is key for them necessarily. You focus on the stuff that's going to add the most value.
Well, I've got a double-edged sword for you here on this one, Emma. It's one of the said, okay, new to all this, can you define a PMO? And as part two of the question, who should fund it?
It's a really tricky question. Only because there isn't a silver bullet. I can't say to you, this is what a PMO is. The reality is, a PMO is whatever your business needs it to be at that particular moment in time. The key to PMOs is that it's adaptable. At its very core, it supports organizations in their change delivery. That's it. What anything else outside of that looks like is entirely on the organization and also the people running it. So I've built PMOs that are very report focused, so they're very delivery focused. All they really do, not all, but what they do is focus on how well our project's performing and reporting that up. In that organization, that's what they needed, and that was fine. I've also worked on the other end of the scale, where it went from prioritization of annual operating planning and actually developing that, right through to training, development, coaching, mentoring, and managing the career path. So it really does depend on what it is. So my biggest advice to somebody that's dealing with, I've been told what PMO is and I'm not sure what it is to go and ask why. Why have you asked us for a PMO? Because I can almost guarantee you that what you think they want is not what they think they want. So it's really important that you understand what are the benefits that those people actually are expecting, and then build whatever support functions you need in order to give them that. Don't try to boil the ocean.
Who actually funds PMOs? Yeah.
So again, it depends. So I've been involved in a PMO that was part of a business transformation office. So it was funded at that level. Some organizations are huge and have a very big hierarchy. So they will generally sit underneath some kind of process function. Smaller organizations just go straight up to the C-level. So again, think about what are the benefits that you're trying to achieve and how can you provide those, and where does your PMO have to sit in order to do that? There's no point you sitting at delivery level and just having visibility of the project if somebody is actually expecting you to do coaching and mentoring and training necessarily. What you need to do is go again, ask the questions, understand what it is they actually expect you to deliver, and then you'll understand where it naturally makes sense. If it's quite a financial piece that they want, it makes sense for you to have some kind of link, potentially maybe with the finance department or the audit department. So it really does depend on the structure of your organization. And if people want to give me actual examples, then simply send an email to that top email address. And if you give me more information, I can kind of maybe give you more examples of what's worked in that kind of scenario.
Right, we're talking about the why syndrome there. Is when you're establishing the why in different companies, is it usually very similar?
I believe that PMOs go through the same journey, but just a slightly different flavour. I'm a bit of a foodie, you might have guessed from that statement. But fundamentally, start off with why. Why are you there to exist? I was given when I first got into PMO, I was effectively given a blank check. It was awesome. It was like, build us this PMO that is global and do it however you see fit. That's a very rare situation. So I went headlong into it. It was brilliant. I could do whatever I wanted within reason. And I built the Ferrari of all PMOs. And to this day, it would be ahead of its curve of what's happening in the industry. However, when it actually came down to it, it maybe didn't need that. It maybe needed just a horse and cart, or maybe a Ford Fiesta, who knows. But understanding why people want you there will help you to really develop how far do you need to go. I'm not sure if any of you have used the P3M3 maturity model to actually measure your organization's maturity in project management. Quite a lot of people look at that for the first time and go, oh, 5 sounds awesome. I want to be level 5. I want to be level 5. Actually, I'm not going to say most, a lot of organizations, they'd be quite happy with a 3. They'd be pretty comfy at a 3. We're happy just to get to that, maybe pushing into a 4. So if by asking that why, you can understand why and how far, it will help you to really develop the right PMO for that organization.
Looking at this one is obviously something in a lot of people's mind is I'm in the process of setting up a one-person program management office for 9 projects. How many people are normally required effectively to run a PG PMO?
Okay, so the P3 manual pretty much in a roundabout kind of way says that somebody can effectively manage kind of 7 program projects at a time, which is fine. And historically, quite a lot of people thought, well, you have to tie it to how many million pounds or dollars or euros your PMO is actually managing, or how many projects and programs do we have. The reality is, you can give me 7 projects, but one of them might be 3 years long and massive, and another one might be 3 weeks long. So for me, that doesn't work, and that's a very personal view. From a real world perspective, I think you need to look at why. What are the services that are going to add the most value? Now, let's say we pick 5 services. We pick demand and resource management, methods and standards, the development of, doing some training, doing risk management and quality assurance, and let's go for portfolio prioritization just for fun. So I have those 5 functions. Now we could say, well, I'm sure that 2 people can run those 5 functions, but when you actually break them down, they need very different skills. So a person who is very good at portfolio prioritization may not naturally be a brilliant trainer or mentor or coach. So we have to think about who are the people and the skills that we need to run those 5 functions. You could also say, well, I need 5 people because those are 5 fairly different things. But I'm sure most of you will have done some kind of personality profile at some point in your careers. And those personality profiles kind of tell us what our advantages are, if you like, what we are particularly skilled in. So that for those 5 functions, actually the demand and resource and the prioritization, those skills are not massively dissimilar. It probably needs somebody who's quite analytical, that is very detail oriented, and isn't maybe scared to challenge. So those 2 maybe could be done with 1 person. And you know, training and methods and standards for me in a PMO world go quite close together, because you have to understand and know it in order to train it. So then there's an argument for me that we should be delivering and developing that. So I think don't look at what's out there in the world and try and get to a number that somebody said once. I think look at the services you're going to offer and the skill sets that you need, and then look at those kinds of people. The people you have in PMO today, maybe doing lots of admin work, aren't necessarily the right people for your future PMO that's all about mentoring and coaching. So look at the services, look at the skills, and then you'll figure out how many people you need. In this one case, you have one person for 9 programs. How big are those? Are some of them quite small? Are they 3 years long? What is your organization expecting? Is it about reporting and making sure that assurance and everything's happening in the right way? Or do they want something different? Do they want you to coach those programs and projects and maybe fly in and help them out every now and again? As a one person, you might be able to do one of those, but maybe not the other. So I would really challenge on what is it that you're trying to achieve.
I certainly like this one, which says basically, how would you handle conflict between the PMO and project managers who perhaps don't see the value in the governance being implemented?
Tell them why. So I'm a big fan of why. You might have guessed this by now. But in the same way that you have to understand why you exist, they also have to understand why you're asking them for stuff. And there comes that point of the days of, for me anyway, the days of PMO sitting in an ivory tower and pushing out process are gone. So I'll give you a really interesting example. At an organization, we redeveloped the project status report. It sounds like not a very big task, but let's just say it was a very complex status report. It was very fancy. It did all sorts of things. It checked quality and did all sorts of automated stuff. So we developed a straw man and put it out there to 70 project managers. Those project managers were asked, this is what we're thinking. Can you come back to us with genuine feedback? And they came back with 102 pieces of feedback. That's quite a lot. We implemented 100 of those pieces of feedback. So there were, some of them were ideas, stuff we hadn't even thought of. So by implementing that 100 out of 102, what do you think happened when we launched it? They all used it because they understood that they'd been part of that journey and what it was that we were trying to achieve in terms of bringing something like this in. And for us, it was consistency. We wanted to make sure that all of our reporting was very, very consistent. So absolutely make sure that they understand the why and that they are on your journey with you. And that can be quite hard if you're in a sporadic organization that's maybe all over the world, but there's nothing stopping you from asking their opinion. I don't believe in experts. That's why Colin introduced me originally as a bit of a guru, but I don't believe in experts. I think the day you call yourself an expert, you've stopped learning. And I don't think we should ever stop learning. So just because you're in the PMO doesn't mean you have all the good ideas. So ask them. And as one of the quotes from PMO Wisdom said earlier, nobody destroys what one helps to build. So if you get them and ask them, and they might tell you you're being unreasonable, but if you listen, you might just agree. You might surprise yourself.
How would you recommend a bottom-up push to create a PMO within the organization? Should you try to get senior management to buy in on the idea?
Yes, you should try. But if you're I'm sensing from that question that maybe the senior management aren't totally bought in. So I don't believe that lack of sponsorship is a true reason why PMOs fail, even though it gets cited quite a lot. I actually think it's a symptom of the problem. I think it's a symptom of they're not receiving what they expected to receive, maybe because we didn't ask the why. But I've done it bottom up before, if you want to call it that, by engaging and working with the project managers and getting them understanding why we're doing this and genuinely getting them into that, start off with a very small community just to change people. And then eventually that will start to actually work its way up, because they will go to meetings, they'll have their project boards, and there'll be a senior person in there, and they'll be like, oh, I just need to fill this document in. Well, what is that? Why are you filling that in? And it will. It takes longer, usually, but there is an argument for doing it that way actually works better, because you've got the people actually living and breathing it on board first. So they will then help to champion that upwards. If you do it the other way, there is an argument that it will be quicker because it's mandated, if you like, but maybe the people who are living and breathing it aren't as bought in as the senior management, which leads to challenges. So there are an argument for each way, but it can be done, but just expect your journey to take a little bit longer.
I think we've got time for a couple more, Emma. One of them is when our PMO was set up, we were asked that it be a big bang. I want you all to start tomorrow. A year or so on, we are struggling selling the benefits of the PMO to the business. Do you think we need to step back and first understand why we are here within our organisation?
That would absolutely be my advice. So if you take your life, if you have to, I don't know, move house in the space of a week, also get married, also have a baby, also buy a new car, also change jobs, and you're moving countries, it's too much change in one go. The same thing applies for organizations. It's too much to ask people to fundamentally change the way that they operate in one fell swoop. The whole thing is about, this is a journey. There's never going to be a point where you say, right, that's it, PMO's done, we're never going to change ever again. That's never going to happen. So the thing I would challenge that leadership is to say, well, this is a journey. So we can put all this stuff in, but no one will use it because we don't have time to get people on board and to get people to change. So they'll find a way around it because that's just human nature. If we don't like it, and we're scared of change, we don't like change naturally. Some of us like change more than others, obviously, but it scares people. I've dealt with an ERP implementation where we're trying to change people's jobs, and they've been doing the same job on the same system for 20 years. So when you speak to the change person that says, well, we don't need to worry about the IT people, really? Because what do you think is going through their head right now? I don't get this, I'm going to lose my job. That's what they'll be thinking. So it's really important that we give people the time to take in and absorb what we're asking them. And if you're asking them to change everything, it's never going to work. What you can do, and what my advice would be, once you've challenged that, is again, find out what's going to add the most value from a leadership perspective and put those in first. So from their perspective, it's big bang because you've given them something that they never had before. But at the lower level, it might not actually be that big a change. You might just be asking them for a bit of extra information, and maybe the PMO facilitate that big bang approach to the leadership on day one. But if you're talking about things like reporting, things like that, you have to even give it time for the data to be right. So it doesn't make sense to me. And I think asking the why and really challenging that approach and understand why you're challenging, so that you can kind of, in an eloquent way, say, this is a terrible idea. I think that would be my advice. And it will be different, again, in every organisation.
Right, we finish on. Thank everybody for coming on board. Sorry that the sound went a little bit funny towards the very end, but I hope this was beneficial to you all. Thank you for attending, and obviously look out on our community page because there's quite a few more webinars coming along. So for the time being, I'd like to say thank you very much and have a good afternoon.